So with the mindful mucus method, it's very explicit in like you are paying attention to what you feel outside the bathroom. You're noticing very obvious like wiping sensations, but everything else you're ignoring. And then you're writing down what you happen to see in the underwear or on the toilet paper. It's a very like clear way of charting mucus instead of just being like, is it creamy, sticky, watery, egg white? Some people are like, I never see egg white. So do I have a peak day? That's like the overarching kind of how it works.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of She's in Sync. Today, I have another guest who I'm really excited to chat with, Nat, and we're going to talk about the mindful mucus methods. We've had a couple fam people, instructors on the podcast before, and this is a method that I transparently, and I said this when we were chatting, I don't know very much about. So I think it's going to be really, really helpful for so many of you who are looking to come off birth control and want to get your cycle back and really be more in tune with your body and also prepare to conceive or prevent pregnancy using this method. So, a little bit about her. She started her journey looking for a reliable way to manage fertility without the side effects of the pill. And after 10 years and over 80 cycles charted, she now teaches others how to use FAM as a highly effective form of birth control. And she bridges the gap between woo and hard science, which I love, and what she likes to call sex ed for witches. So, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Taylor. So excited to be here.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about, I know I just gave like a little brief intro, but tell us a little bit more about your hormone healing journey. I know that you also have PCOS, now known as PMOS. And so we might talk a little bit about that along the way, but I would love to hear from you, like what got you to where you are today.
Yeah, so I wanted, like many people, a reliable way to avoid pregnancy without going on birth control. And this was 10 years ago. And it was actually my doctor who recommended I look into a natural family planning class at like a hospital on a Saturday morning. So me and my boyfriend went and like learned from this couple, and it was like very Catholic and also like very strange and exciting because I'd never heard of like tracking ovulation. And so I dove into the online forums of the Kindara app and Facebook groups and just wanted to like really create a community of other people who picked a more non-conventional form of birth control and wanted to like just get to know their bodies. Like I've always been someone who is very conscious of my health and conscious of wellness and just like self-care, and tracking ovulation felt like another piece of knowing myself and knowing my body. So I started charting my cycles, and as I started to chart, I don't know if my cycles were irregular before I started, but my first cycle was like 127 days long. And then from there, it was just like the most irregular cycles of anybody I have ever met. And I feel like we teach the things that we need to know ourselves, but it has been such a challenging journey being somebody who's like in the hormone health and fertility space and also just having extremely irregular cycles. So I will go experience like stressful seasons, or I used to be a social worker. I was like traveling a lot and working a lot, and my cycles just got really long. Or like during COVID, I had like a 15-month stretch where I wasn't ovulating. And it's like, you know, all this stuff in your head and you know how this stuff works, but then your body is like just on its own path. So I feel like that has been a through line for me, is like I want to be the type of person when people are like, oh, like fertility awareness doesn't work for irregular cycles. It's like, no, actually, that's like the number one candidate to chart their cycles with FAM, because it is so helpful to know that you're not pregnant, ovulation is just delayed. So since learning fertility awareness for myself, I went on to certify in a couple of different methods of fertility awareness, FEM and Billings. And now myself and my co-FAM educator have created our own method under Fertility Knowledge Collective. And we teach fertility awareness educators our own custom charting approach. So that's kind of how I got here.
Yeah. And I think that when like I've been my hardest case study to date. And so I think when we're like our hardest client, like it sucks, but it's also like really helpful because it really does like we go through all those emotional sides of healing too, right? Like so we really get it because I just talked about this yesterday on my Instagram stories where it's like, for me, yes, I can tell women like here's nutrition, here's supplements, but like a lot of the best work comes from like those moments in between where we're talking about, okay, like how's your nervous system? Like what's going on in your life? Like how are these things impacting you? And you identified a lot of that with your story of like your cycles aren't irregular or lengthened for no reason. It's like there's a clear reason. And so I think tracking your cycle is like a really great way to like, it's data of like, okay, like something is off and your body is like asking for support. And it's not just as simple as like, oh, here's like one thing you do that works for everybody. It's like so nuanced.
100%. Yeah, I feel like I could really, really relate to people who are struggling with feeling like they've done everything or they're doing everything well. Because, like, I am that person, like, so much and you're trying everything, and still it's like nothing seems to be working. Like, I trust people so much more when I know that they've gone through challenges like that. Like if somebody is
Yeah.
like has never experienced like a chronic health issue or a hormonal imbalance, it's really hard for me to be like, do you know what it feels like to have tried everything and people are still telling you like this is what you should be doing? And that piece around like it's so true, like your own relationship to your body and just like nervous system support and stress is really fueled by this like feeling like it's your fault or like feeling
Yeah.
like you're doing something wrong or you're not following the rules that you should be following. So yeah.
Mhm. And I think one thing I'll point out here too, which I've been exploring as well, is like the health anxiety of like when you've
Hmm.
gone to doctors and they've basically told you, like the message sometimes is that it's your fault or like there's nothing you can do. And then that makes you feel powerless. Like there's no other option. I know a lot of the women that I work with, it's like they've been told like their only option to regulate their cycle or to help with painful periods or acne or whatever. It's like, well, just go back on birth control. But it's like that's not actually getting to the root of like why your body is signaling this to begin with. And that can be really frustrating. And it not only misinforms women, but it also like you said, it makes them feel like it's their fault. And that can cause anxiety with that, and just a lot of guilt and shame.
100%. Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
tell us a little bit about, like you said, like your method for fertility
Mm-hmm.
awareness and tracking cycle and all that. So like let's dive into that. What is your method?
So when you hear the word method in the world of fertility awareness, it comes with a lot of meaning. So you'll hear like in a lot of like, talking to people who are really wanting to chart in-depth fertility signs for birth control, you'll often hear people say, learn a method. And there's a couple of different ways that we can think about this. So we have some self-teaching resources. So that's like taking charge of your fertility or the Sense Upon Workbook and Manual. Those are self-teaching yourself a system to track your ovulation signs and also interpret that for birth control. So when can you go unprotected? When are you safe based on what this method is saying? And it's things like where do you draw a cover line? Where do you mark your temperature shift? What types of cervical mucus go in which category? How do you mark peak day? How do you open the fertile window? Are you using a calculation? Are you using cervical mucus? All of those little nuances are different based on which method you're using. Then you also have these traditional institutes. So these are methods that have been established for a very long time. A lot of them have Catholic roots, but not all of them do. And they will pull on science and their own research sometimes, or other people's research to create basically that same idea system to understand your ovulation signs. And typically with those, if you're working with a FAM educator who's trained in those methods, you are under that method umbrella. So you are following that method to a T. Some will also track different signs. So we've got like hormonal methods that use hormone testing. We've got cervical mucus and we got basal body temperature. And then over the years, I have essentially like not I have created a method with Fertility Knowledge Collective. So it's a multi-symptom method using basal body temperature, cervical mucus, and hormone testing. And the new generation of methods is what we call a custom charting approach. So you start with a evidence-based set of biomarkers. So you start with cervical mucus and basal body temperature, and then we may add in hormone testing for avoiding pregnancy purposes, but it is very much based on what we see in your chart and what's usable data. So within that, there are different ways of charting cervical mucus. So when we're talking about the mindful mucus method, it's one way that I teach cervical mucus, and the categories are from Fertility Knowledge Collective. So we teach there's 3 categories: a baseline, medio, and peak medio. So other methods of fertility awareness will have many categories, or if you open up an app like Temp Drop app or Kindara app, there will be categories like sticky, creamy, egg white, watery. The mindful mucus method is different. It is sensation forward and uses your own words to describe what you're seeing and feeling. So instead of saying like marking creamy, you are using your own words, and then it's fitting into the categories like baseline, medio, or peak medio, which have different characteristics. So the other difference too is the way that we teach mucus at Fertility Knowledge Collective, or the way I teach mucus, is sensation forward. So it's the feeling that you feel when you get your period and you don't even need to go to the bathroom to know that your period started. That's what we're talking about with sensation. So you're not ignoring what you feel. You are also writing down what you happen to see, but you're not like digging for mucus, you're not investigating, you're not stretching it. And I think the big thing with the FAM world is that we're not being like explicit enough about how to chart mucus. So with the mindful mucus method, it's very explicit in like you are paying attention to what you feel outside the bathroom. You're noticing very obvious like wiping sensations, but everything else you're ignoring. And then you're writing down what you happen to see in the underwear or on the toilet paper. It's a very like clear way of charting mucus instead of just being like, is it creamy, sticky, watery, egg white? Some people are like, I never see egg white. So do I have a peak day? That's like the overarching kind of how it works.
Okay. So you're really diving. Do you still use, did you say you start with like the basal body temperature and cervical mucus, and then you just go
Mm-hmm.
deeper into the cervical mucus part?
Yeah, so with the FKC method, we teach basal body temperature and cervical mucus to start. And then we do put a lot of emphasis on cervical mucus just because there tends to be so much confusion around how to do it that we definitely like emphasize cervical mucus, but we also teach basal body temperature as a cross check to cervical mucus. And then some people, actually, a lot of people end up charting LH tests as well, or optional progesterone tests too.
Mhm. Okay. And so it sounds like your method is very like the words that are coming to my mind are like intuitive of like, not trying to put yourself in one category of like, I'm in this category, but it's more intuitive. Like, what are you feeling? What are you noticing? Like, I'm thinking of intuitive eating almost of like just becoming in tune with what signals your body is giving you. And then also like very individualized as well of like, depending on the person, what their goals are, what they're looking for, you might do some hormone testing, you might do just the mindful mucus method. Like it depends. It's very individualized, it sounds like.
100%. I would say like I would always pair cervical mucus with another sign like basal body temperature. So it is the mucus part of a bigger approach or a bigger
Mhm.
method, but it is very mindful, like mindful eating, because you are not ignoring what you feel at the vulva.
Mhm.
But at the same time, it's still very specific with what you pay attention to and what you ignore. And not everybody likes that approach. Like some people do like being told, like, if your mucus stretches this many centimeters, this is the category it goes into. And so there's like, I guess like 2 schools of thought with mucus charting. And if you're somebody who like really wants to be told like this is exactly what it is, you may not like a sensation-based mucus charting approach, but there's something for everybody, which is the really beautiful thing.
So that being said, let's talk about the pros and cons of, since you kind of brought that up, like what are some of the pros of doing it this way compared to more of the, I don't know, is it fair to say like traditional fem method, or is that like the right terminology? I don't know if this is more modern, or
Yeah.
how would you say it?
Yeah, I think like what I'm talking about is when we're talking about like custom charting approaches is a more modern way of doing it. I think when you're thinking of like traditional institutes that teach fertility awareness, it is very strict. So you are like, which is like good for a lot of reasons. Like there is something to be said for having these guidelines and boundaries around like what's acceptable and what's not. But the downside of that is if your cycle doesn't fit, like if you're charting cervical mucus only, like with Billings, for example, and you're not getting a peak date because you just came off birth control, which cervical mucus is a huge piece around coming off birth control. A lot of people don't have much visible mucus when they come off. So a cervical mucus only like method like Billings, which would say we're only doing mucus, temperature we're ignoring, hormone testing we're ignoring, then it could look like someone wasn't ovulating when they actually were. Whereas a custom charting approach where we are starting with BBT, cervical mucus, and other hormone tests, it's like we have the flexibility to give you more insight into your body if one of those biomarkers isn't lining up or isn't showing us good data. It's like some people will be charting like oral basal body temperature and temp drop. It's like we have the ability to give you the options for both and find which one works best for you. But at the same time, some people, like I said, do want to be told. Well, it just popped open, scared me. Some people do want to be told like that explicitly, like this is the way it's done. And if you're that type of person, then you will really benefit from a method like Creighton or Just East that's like got a bunch of different categories and you can always find a category to fit your mucus into. And I think like the beautiful thing about learning fertility awareness and you start exposing yourself to all of these different methods as you realize there's always more to learn. And it is a whole world. Like it's got like religious underpinnings and it's got um generations of women who've noticed things about their bodies and they're like, something is going on here. Like, it's not coincidence. So you've got like a lot of different lineages. And now I think a lot of people are wanting to learn about that lineage. They're wanting to learn about like how we got to where we are now. And I think that's a really cool thing. So I'm all about like, okay, if I'm going to teach this specific rule, like sensation focused mucus charting, like where does that come from? Or if I'm teaching like a calculation rule, like where does that come from and what's the evidence behind it? So it's really about just like having these conversations and helping people make informed decisions about like their fertility intentions and their own bodies.
Yeah, and that's even something like I just when I talk about it, I say fam, you know, and then I'm like I've learned through talking with a lot of you where it's like there's different subcategories of that, which I didn't know. So it's really cool. And that is exactly what you said. It's like the benefit of having different instructors and different styles and different methods because you can see what works well for you.
Yeah, 100%.
So some of the pros of doing it this way, you mentioned, you know, well, it's more not modern. What's the word you were saying? Mindful, obviously.
Mhm.
So let's talk about like other pros of the mindful mucus method and the approach that you take.
Yeah, so I think it is intuitive. I think like people who feel like, oh, I'm gonna miss something, like I need to check all the time, like I need to check for mucus, like if I miss it, then I'm gonna be like it's not gonna be as effective. So for people like that, it's like if you're charting all the time by noticing the sensation at the vulva, you're not gonna miss anything. If you're somebody who does not notice very much visible cervical mucus, so if you're like, I never see egg white mucus, or I never see the stretchy, slimy stuff that I see online, the sensation is the missing piece. So you can still mark a peak day with a slippery sensation. So if you think about like something that analogy that I teach my clients all the time is like if you're showering and shampooing your hair, the feeling of like the sudsy water running down your back is a slippery sensation. And that's a highly fertile sensation. Whereas if you're just rinsing your hair and water's kind of rushing down your back, you're not going to slip at the bottom of the tub. It's just water. And that's just a watery sensation. So even noticing those slight differences between like what's slick and slippery and what's just wet or moist is going to help you be able to mark a peak day if you're someone who doesn't notice very much visible mucus. And we're not ignoring completely like what we see. That's still really important. But there's so much emphasis on like the visible that like a lot of times we forget that what we feel when we're not even looking is also really important. And then with this method, we do have categories and we do have criteria for like what is a baseline day, what is medio, and what is a peak medio day. But you're using your own words in the notes to start to find your own patterns. So like somebody's mucus might be everybody's is gonna be different to everyone else. So like your mucus pattern is going to be different from mine from like least to most fertile. You may have dry days as your least fertile observation. I don't have dry days. So like my low estrogen baseline is going to be different from yours. Or I might notice tons of visible, stretchy, stringy mucus that like dangles off the toilet paper. That's like my most fertile day. And I'll also feel that slippery sensation. Someone else might only feel slippery when they wipe and they don't see anything visible. So we do emphasize like certain words and sensations having more importance, like that slippery feeling or seeing the strings or seeing the clear. That's going to put you in a peak medio category. But within that, there is some difference in like how fertile like mucus shows up for different people. So it allows for different experiences, if that makes sense.
And when you say like outside of the bathroom, that's one thing so you're not talking about, because I know another thing with traditional methods, it's like what you see in your underwear, but then also when you're wiping. So you're talking about outside of that, like just in your everyday life.
Yes. So like right now, when you're sitting here or when you're listening to this podcast, if you tune into what you feel at the vulva, you might notice that you feel nothing. You feel dry, like there's nothing going on. Or you might be walking around and suddenly you feel a gush, or you feel some kind of slickness as you're walking. That's all what we're talking about when we're talking about sensation. So it's what you feel outside the bathroom, just like I said, like when you get your period, you feel it without even needing to go, or you feel something, you're like, oh, I bet you I'm going to see a lot of cervical mucus. And then you go and look at the toilet paper after. It's the feeling you feel when you're not in the bathroom. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about sensation.
Yeah. And then you also said for people with irregular cycles, this method is beneficial. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I think for like I'm on a really big PMOS deep dive right now. And the classic expression of PMS in the cycles is having these long cycles with multiple patches of cervical mucus. So like multiple ovulation attempts in within that long follicular phase. So if you have an irregular mucus pattern, like say you don't go from dry to peak right away and ovulate that first time in your cycle, you're going to have a different mucus baseline. And it's really important to distinguish those ovulation attempts from like a true ovulation. And the mindful mucus method helps you do that because it's tailored to your own patterns. But it also, like, it's really, really important to have that like cross check of progesterone, like a basal body temperature cross check, so that you can be really clear with like what was just a rise in estrogen and what was a successful ovulation.
hmm Yeah. Are there any other like groups of people or personality types that you find this works well for or that jive well with it?
hmm Well, like post-birth control is a big one. So, um, I don't know if you see this with your clients, but like coming off birth control is like a lot of sameness, like a lot of discharge that doesn't really change from day to day. It's very thick. It's a very like dry feeling. Some people describe it as like really sticky and very little peak type cervical mucus. So you could have like a basal body temperature shift, but no peak day, for example. It doesn't mean you're not ovulating. It just means like like your cervix isn't responding to hormones yet, or it's like not like it's just not, I want to say not working yet, but like you know what I mean? It's just
Yeah, it
taking
needs
some
more time
time.
to acclimate to life after birth control.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you're somebody who doesn't see that visible mucus, like the sensation charting is going to be really, really helpful for you. And if you've learned another method of fertility awareness and you're like, I just wasn't able to confirm ovulation, definitely try a custom charting approach like this method. So really people who aren't like fitting into rigid methods will benefit and find it helpful to like learn how to chart other biomarkers or learn how to chart sensation forward cervical mucus. And then what else? Other people. I think like if you're an anxious charter, I say that because like everybody's an anxious charter, right? Like if you're wanting to use FAM to avoid pregnancy, it does feel like that responsibility is like fully on you, right? It feels like it's not a passive type of birth control. So it can be really normal to feel anxious or to feel like you're questioning yourself. And for some people, this method really highlights that anxiety. Like if you're somebody, like I said, who wants those objective categories, this might not be the method for you. But if you're wanting to like deeply trust yourself and chart no matter what's going on in your life, whether you're like traveling or in your normal routine, like a mindful mucus method approach goes with you. Like you don't need to change anything about your life in order to make it work. So
Hmm.
it's just about
Yeah,
knowing yourself. Yeah.
yeah, I love that. What about, so you mentioned like one group that this isn't the best fit for you've seen is like people who want like rigid answers and like definitive, like you fit in this category right now, do or don't, versus the more intuitive aspect of it. So, are there any other like cons? I hate to say the word cons, but like just things to consider
Mhm.
when you're thinking about which method to go with right now.
Yeah, I think it just depends on like your lifestyle, like just like whether you're choosing an oral thermometer or temp drop. You want to think about what's going to fit well in your life. If you're somebody who can't take an LH test every single day, like that's good to know about yourself. So, I think there's like workarounds for most things. Like I think about like shift workers or people with kids. I've worked with like a lot of people who have weird schedules and hormone testing and oral basal body temperature is really hard for those people. But there's usually like some kind of workaround. And it's not that there's no mucus categories. Like there are criteria around like what fits each of those categories. It's more that there's less categories than, say, a method like Creighton or Justice that has like dozens of cervical mucus categories. So every tiny little difference fits into a category. Like it just will because that's how that method works. Whereas with this method, it's intuitive, yes. There are categories, but there's only three. So it's like a lot of different things fit into the medio category, that like middle. And it's like we're really sticky and stingy about like what fits in the baseline and what fits in peak medio, but everything else kind of fits into the middle bucket. And if you're somebody who like wants to find all the little differences in that middle category, this wouldn't be a good method for you. But if you're okay being like what's noise on the chart and what's actually functional and giving us good information, then this type of approach would work well.
Yeah, and you were saying like the anxious charter is like more likely to feel that anxiety with this method. But actually, I was just thinking, I was like, I feel like it could go the opposite way, where it's like this could
Hmm.
be a good test of like, I mean, obviously, like working with a coach would be helpful, but then like learning to trust your body more and like
Yeah,
be less rigid with these types of things.
totally. I think a lot of the anxiety of like a classic one that I see is like trying to figure out the minute differences between the medio or the middle category where it's a like a non-peak category. Um, I think the more there's a type of person, and I'm like I used to be like this too before I learned to chart this way. It's like you think that having more information is going to make you feel more secure, but there's no amount of information that will ever make you feel secure. You have to at some point choose to trust yourself. And I think learning from a fam educator is really helpful to help you like sift through the noise of like what to actually do, right? Because there's so much out there and learn a method. And once you've learned that, then you have to be like, okay, zooming out, I'm going to look at my patterns and I'm going to trust that I know my body because I guarantee that you do know your body. It's just that like constant underlying fear of like, am I getting this right? That's making you question yourself. So
Mhm.
part of like what I help people do is be like, okay, let's step back and just look at what we know and see if I can help you figure out what's going on here instead of constantly being the person that's coming in and telling you what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's really where you can start to feel super confident and like get out from the like panic and fear and like noise and just be like, okay, let's just like sit back and see what's happening. Or sometimes it's like maybe we need to wait a few days and see what's happening instead of like in the moment being like, did I ovulate or not? It's like
Yeah.
actually maybe it's helpful to wait a couple days and just look back and like I can help you objectively look at that, but ultimately like I want you to eventually trust yourself and feel really secure with what's going on so that you don't need me forever.
Yep. Yeah, I'm nodding a lot if you can't see me right now because I think that's very similar with my clients coming off birth control is like there's so much distrust and fear
Hmm.
around that because like they've been on artificial hormones for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you know, and so like they don't know how their body functions without that. And they're going through a
Yeah.
whirlwind of like, hopefully, if they work with me, you know, we're prepping their body for a smoother transition off. But a lot of women come to me, especially after coming off birth control cold turkey, and they're like, my body is going crazy. I'm not having a period. Like it's irregular, blah, blah. And I always tell people, I'm like, the first 3 months, if we work together to prep your body, the first 3 months after birth control is like data. It's just
Yeah.
experimentation, it's data. Don't expect to get a period right away. Don't expect it to be perfect. Like we're just gathering information because you have to give your body grace of like, again, you've been on this birth control and it does a lot to your body. It doesn't just affect your period, it affects everything else in your body, which also inadvertently affects your period. But you know, people get so caught up on like, oh, I didn't get my period, or it's been, you know, 45 days and I haven't gotten. I'm like, that's okay. Like, if it goes longer than 3 months, we'll investigate more. But like right now, I'm not expecting you to. Right now, if you do, great. But there's, yeah, a lot of fear and misinformation. And I think what we're told too when we go on birth control, at least I was, it's like, stay on this, there's no side effects, and then come off when you want to get pregnant. And like, I mean, a lot of people do that and then they don't have a period or they have issues with their cycles. And it's like because we weren't told everything that birth control does and then also how it impacts your body. And so we just expect it to go back to normal.
I love what you said about looking at things like an experiment. Or I don't know if that's what you said, but like that's
Yeah,
what I
I
heard
did.
is
Yeah,
like,
I say that all the time.
yeah, like we don't know what's gonna happen. And I think we want to know what's gonna
Yeah.
happen.
It's a
And like,
natural anxiety thing. Like we want to plan for what's going to happen to keep ourselves
yeah,
safe.
yeah. And so I love that around just like trying things and looking at things like an experiment.
And that again is the benefit of having coaches, right? Having support with someone who it's not just chat GPTing at midnight or like, you know, going down Google rabbit holes. It's like someone who knows you, knows your history, knows your body, and like can help you personally versus a, you know, a generic, like, this is what could be going on. Cause that, like you said, the more information piece, like we've all gone down the chat GPT rabbit hole. Like I know I have, and we think it will help, but then sometimes it can like, you're like, oh, I've been doing this for like an hour and I don't feel very much better. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So what kind of how do you support women in this? Like tell us more about your business and what offers you have for people who are interested in working with you.
So I teach people in a group program called Cycle Love, and it runs 3 times a year, but I do a bunch of other workshops and offers in between. So Cycle Love is where you learn the mindful mucus method, you learn the basal body temperature rules that we teach in Fertility Knowledge Collective. You learn how to open and close the fertile window, and it's all self-paced lessons. And then every other week, we have a group call where I'll review your chart live on the call with everyone else
Hmm,
there. So
I
we
like
get
that.
to see, yeah, we get to see other people's charts, people with lots of mucus, people with no mucus, people in perimenopause, people in PCOS, just like a really wide range of experiences so that you come out feeling like you know what your cycle's doing. You can get my help with that, but also like if anything else weird happens in the future, you know how to handle it. And that's really what I really want people to leave feeling like competent with. And then we have guest experts. So you're coming in next week to chat like functional lab testing and mental health post birth control. So we've got guests coming in every week. It's a very like dynamic group, and yeah, basically people join because they want to learn fertility awareness to avoid birth control, to avoid birth control. Yeah, that and pregnancy, and just don't want to read taking charge of your fertility cover to cover, essentially.
Yeah,
And then I teach FAM educators how to be FAM educators at Fertility Knowledge Collective. That
cool.
program runs once a year. We just started this cohort in May, which is also a really great program. And then I do lots of like one-off workshops. And I'm doing one on PMOS next week. And then I also did sex ed for witches at the beginning of the year, which is like options for the fertile window. And then lots of cervical mucus focused programs too.
Yeah, you're a busy lady.
Yeah. Yeah, I am.
Yeah, I'm excited to speak in your group next week because and I love that you do everyone's charts together because I think that it helps to like learn from other people. Like, and
Yeah.
the more case studies you have, like I'm thinking about myself when I was in school. It's like if I just met one on one with a mentor and just went through my stuff or like my clinical stuff cases, it's like you learn things, but then if you have someone else who's like going through their client case studies or like bringing up questions, like you can learn from each other. And I like the fact that it like normalizes that this looks so different for everybody that there's not a like one size fits all, which I think is
Yeah.
very much how like modern medicine makes it seem.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are nervous. We're nervous, being like, oh, I don't know if I want other people to see my
Yeah.
charts. But that nervousness like goes away instantly because you're like, wait, we're all in the same boat. And eventually, like, people learn to really love these calls and like love watching me. Like, I'll set a timer, I'll review your chart, and I'll just like ask you questions about it. And I'll go through how everything is marked, your cervical mucus, your temps, like everything. I'll just troubleshoot it. And then you'll get to like get that feedback, but then also everyone else likes to see what I recommend for your chart. Because like who
Yeah.
knows, you might have a cycle where you can't confirm ovulation with temp. So like how do you handle that? Or you might have
Hmm.
a cycle with daylight savings, or you might have a cycle with travel, or like, like all of these things happen. And that's where a manual just like cannot help you with that
Yeah.
because those are only the perfect textbook cycles that you see in the manual.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I love what you just said about the different, like you said, shift workers earlier or daylight
Hmm.
savings. I didn't even think about that. Like, we don't think about that being a thing,
Yeah.
but it's like, it like impacts people so much, just that 1 hour forward, 1 hour back, or like traveling.
There's so many things. I would say like 90% of the time, people's charts are being impacted by life. So it's like we want to find out what someone's normal life looks like when they're fertility charting. And then if something weird happens, we want to track that thing. So we want to see like, yeah, if you went on an overseas flight or if you worked nights, we want to track that and see if things like cervical mucus, things like your temperature, things like ovulation are being thrown off by those things. And for some people, it does. And for other people, it doesn't. It's so
Mhm.
individual. And the only way to find out is to be tracking that stuff. And it also depends on like where it's happening in the cycle. So like people will be, I say typically like, if you have an 80% consistency with FAM, if you're taking your temperature 80% of the time, you'll probably be good. It doesn't need to be perfect, but you do need to have enough data to paint a full picture of ovulation. But yeah, like daylight savings happens or a new medication or like clients who go through like I don't know, like had a client who had a car accident at the
Yeah,
beginning of the
stress.
cycle. And like her cycle was really weird. And we talked about it and like tried to piece together what was happening. So
Hmm.
it's to be expected that weird things are gonna
Yeah,
happen.
it's not perfect.
And yeah, it's just the way things are. And
Yeah.
that's like my jam is like, how can we like figure out what's helpful information here and what can we disregard? Like what, like, and how can we know that really so we can feel
Hmm.
confident?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I I think this is such an important thing for women to, if you get nothing else from this conversation, get this, is that there is no perfect cycle and it's not going to look the exact same
Yeah.
every single month
Yes.
because life
100%.
happens. And I
Yeah.
say that with like everything else, like that's a signal that your body's giving you. And I, we are so rigid. I think that's like the overarching theme is like anxiety and rigidity around our health and our cycle with this combo. But it's like, yeah, if you just read about what should be happening, it's like you have a 28-day cycle, you ovulate on day 14, like blah, blah, blah. And it's like that looks different and that's going to change. And a lot of time, and you layer in coming out birth control, that's going to be something different, and stress and life and all of that. So I have a lot of clients who like message me in a panic being like, I missed my period this month, or I haven't had a period yet, or things like that. And I'm like, and they're like, I haven't changed anything, like everything's the same. And I'm like, well, how's your stress? Like, what's been going on in your life? And they're like, well, I've been pretty stressed lately. I had this situation come up. I'm like, bingo. You know what I mean? But we're not taught. That's a whole other conversation about like mental health, but we're not taught that those are very real things that can impact our cycle, because it's when we don't feel safe, our body's not going to ovulate, it's not going to have a period, of course that's going to impact things.
I love that.
Okay, so to wrap everything up, where can people find you? And then I'm going to ask my fun little get to know you question at the end.
So probably the best place to find me is on Instagram at Fertility Awareness Project. And then my website is fertilityawarenessproject.ca. I have a bunch of free courses. The Mucus Made Easy course is a really great one. And there's also FAM Fundamentals if you're curious about learning fertility awareness for birth control, which are both on my website.
Perfect. So check those things out. We'll put all those in the show notes. And then how are you nourishing yourself in this season?
I am coming off a season of like back-to-back program launches. It's May, and I run two launches for my group program and then one for Fertility Knowledge Collective. So I feel like the way that I'm nurturing myself is by just following the threads of what's interesting to me and what's exciting to me and spending time at the library in the nonfiction section, just like browsing cookbooks, just following my curiosities instead of feeling like I'm constantly under like a deadline or like
Mhm.
needing to be productive. I've also been getting into running. I've never been a runner, and like it's just I find that trying new things or challenging myself in new ways is always nourishing to me. So starting my day with movement, like getting like going outside, going running, and then like coming home and looking forward to having my cappuccino and then getting into work. It's just such a nice way to start the day, which is what I did today. It's why
Yes,
it's like
I saw
right
that in your
there.
stories. I was like, that
Yeah,
sounds like
it's
you did
just
that.
like, oh, it's so nice. And then like freezer meal prep has also been nourishing me, like just having something always there for lunch, instead of like not having lunch or just having like a protein shake after I work out. Like having some designated meal prep days or just batching like big batches and filling my freezer has also just been so helpful. So I feel like all of those things are keeping me going right now and keeping me feeling like really good.
Yeah.
And it's also summer and like, I'm just excited to spend as much time outside as I can.
Yes. Here, here. I love that. I love
Yeah.
all of that. That's
Yeah.
perfect. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. This was such a cool conversation. And I'm sure those of you who are listening, I'm sure it's information overwhelmed. Like there's so much that we talked about and covered, but hopefully it was helpful. And if you know another woman who needs this information, please feel free to share this episode, leave a 5-star review. Would really appreciate it. A comment, a like. It just really helps grow the show. And it's also helpful for me because sometimes I feel like I don't know what resonates or what you guys want to hear more of. So any and all feedback, you can always shoot me a DM on Instagram too. But thank you so much for listening. And until next time, stay nourished, everybody.